Chapter 4. Very Lucky. If Artemis were the type who would willingly display his feelings, he would have cried. But he was not, so he did not. Garrett, that incorrigible boy, his incorrigible boy, had killed a woman. Now Garrett's own life teetered on a knife blade. He could be expelled from the order, his memory wiped by glyphs, to live once again as a street urchin. But this time, with a full 2 years' worth of memories missing. Or he could be put on trial and executed. For now, he was locked in Artemis's study, awaiting his fate. Artemis felt as though he were in a similar position, despite the fact that he was unfettered and in First Keeper Xavier's office, along with Second and Third Keepers Orland and Mayer, respectively. One of the enforcers who were present at the time of the incident was also there, but had been silent throughout the meeting. "This is inconceivable," said Xavier, "our most promising novice. It would be a great shame to simply do away with him. However, the facts cannot be ignored. He has risked our discovery, as well as his own balance. After such an act, he cannot be trusted any longer," said Mayer firmly. "Nonetheless, his actions were based on our best interests. Perhaps he is not as far gone as you think," interjected Artemis, surprised at his own boldness. "Pardon me for sounding trite," said Orland loudly, "but the road to disaster is paved with good intentions. The boy has killed a woman. Not only is this a crime outside our own walls, but is an act unsanctioned for him, perhaps. But we cannot deny that our intention was to slay anyone who might have attempted to take the chalice and there upset the balance within the city's infrastructure." Mayer spoke softly, but his words left a mark. Xavier tapped his index finger against his chin. He stayed with his thoughts for what felt like an age, before speaking slowly. "I suppose that was our intention, and no matter how unsettling it may be." He glanced at Orland, who frowned. "Garrett did salvage what could have been a cataclysmic disruption of the balance within the city. Unsanctioned, yes, but much needed. In my personal opinion, the enforcers themselves could have handled the situation much more skillfully, but they could not have made it in time. Given the circumstances, Garrett did rather well." "Rather well?" repeated Orland incredulously. "He stabbed a woman in the back." "As any enforcer would have done, if they were in a similar setting," interrupted Artemis.
"First Keeper Xavier, may I speak?"
All four men flinched visibly at the sound of the enforcer's voice. As Keeper Masters, they all had the glyph of telepathy cast on them, but none of them were quite used to the strange, metallic harmony of an enforcer's voice. "You may, Third Enforcer," answered Xavier, peering curiously at the tall, masked figure.
The novice called Garrett managed to find the seventh enforcer when seventh's distress call was intended to alert only the other enforcers. I believe.
The enforcer shifted, as though nervous. It was unusual for any enforcer to enter a thought without the support of its fellows.
I believe that this Garrett may have been able to hear the call as well. If this is true, then it would be to your advantage to keep him and encourage him to explore this ability, as well as any others he may have.
To hear an enforcer without any glyph abilities is highly unusual, Mayor murmured, as though to himself. As I'm sure we are all aware, Third Keeper Mayor, snapped Orland, pointedly ignoring the cold stare Mayor was giving him. He adjusted his spectacles and continued. This is all very intriguing, and perhaps the fact that Garrett has killed a woman in the interest of the Order can be overlooked. But he did in fact deliberately disobey an order given to him by a senior keeper. His own mentor, in fact. He cannot go without some sort of discipline. Orland clearly refused to let such gross impropriety go unpunished. Secretly, Artemis agreed with him. I will speak to Garrett myself, offered Artemis, low-key as always, and will devise a suitable punishment. Very good. Xavier adjusted the collar of his robe with an air of finality. Keeper Artemis, I trust that you will see to this in a timely manner. But for now, let us put this dark matter to rest. It is very late, and we are not as young as we used to be. However, I would like to speak with you, Third Enforcer, in private. He gave his fellows a small smile that said clearly, We're done here. Orland, Mayor, and Artemis gave brief nods and left. Mayor immediately dismissed himself and went on towards his quarters, not being one for unofficial conversation. Orland, on the other hand, stopped Artemis with a gesture before he could do the same. I think I should make it clear, Artemis, that I do not approve of these proceedings. No one said you had to. Orland scoffed. This is highly irregular. No matter how gifted your Garrett may be, he must be held accountable. Orland, Artemis interrupted. Just because he is talented, or because I am the one issuing the punishment, does not mean he will go with impunity. This I can do on my own. He finished with a stiff nod, and turned away on his heel, not caring to see the daggers Orland was staring at his retreating figure. For the sake of his own balance, Artemis forced himself to slow his quick gait and meditate for a moment on the situation. The truth was, Artemis did not like Orland. He could respect him. Orland was a very intelligent man and competent at his work, but he was also stubborn and officious, something that Artemis could not abide. Even as acolytes, he and Orland hadn't gotten along. Now, as grown men, they no longer argued fiercely like they once did, but rather in a quieter, bureaucratic way. Artemis avoided these pissing matches, for lack of a better term, as best he could. As much as he would have liked to shout at Orland, he did know better. Deep in his thoughts, Artemis almost missed the door to his own study. He pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to starve off the looming headache. In his mind, the words migraine and Garrett had become inexorably related, over the past 2 years. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door and went in. And there was Garrett, seated quietly where Artemis had left him. There was an indolent slouch to his posture, but otherwise the scene was extremely alien. Artemis had been prepared for a tirade over the unfairness of it all, but Garrett, for once, was silent, almost placid. "He looks like a man on the way to the gallows," thought Artemis idly as he sat down in his desk chair. "Garrett," he searched for the right words. "I think now would be the time to consider yourself very lucky." Now it was Garrett's turn to be surprised. His eyes widened like those of a startled cat, and Artemis almost smiled. "First Keeper Xavier has decided to let you pass on this one. That is, he has left the issue of discipline to me." He prepared for the groan, the scowl, the whining, but still none came. It was almost too good to be true. "I believe that an appropriate punishment is confinement to the grounds until further notice. I will also be compiling a list of mission reports that you will read. Once you have read them, you will write an overview of each report detailing the events and the outcomes, as well as what was done well and what was done poorly in each mission. Understood?" The tiniest shadow of a grimace graced Garrett's face, but he only nodded and said a dutiful, "Yes, sir." "Very good. You may go directly to the dormitories now, and I will see you tomorrow, directly after your classes. Is that clear?" Once again, another "Yes, sir," was issued before Garrett left. As soon as the door was shut, Artemis slumped in his chair and heaved a great sigh of relief. It reminded him too much of an event when he had been a novice involving an old book and a deep well. The irony was sickening. Well, at least that's over and done with. That boy had better appreciate this. Artemis tried to be indignant, but it was too late to be faking emotion to oneself. He had not been so strained in a long time, and really, once he thought about it, it wasn't going to be over for a long time. Perhaps it might never end, at least not for Garrett. He knew that what he did was in the best interest of the Keeper Way, but he would still have to live with the fact that he killed a woman. And he's only just 14, thought Artemis. Garrett felt dizzy. It was though astonishing relief and a nauseating sense of guilt were fighting for domination. He had killed a woman. He had killed a woman. 3 hours ago, he had washed human blood off of his hands and back where it had dripped. Where the bright scarlet wetness had been, there were rust-colored stains that washed away so easily with a little bit of plain water. He could remember so vividly the feel of it against his skin. It had been warm. Garrett felt his throat constrict as he had to lean against the wall for support. She was really dead. And yet here he was, alive as he had ever been. He had gotten off completely scot-free. It was almost too ridiculous to fathom. She was gone, dead, perished, and here he was, her murderer for the builder's sake, facing the prospect of writing a few papers and hanging around the compound for a while.
But don't forget,
said the evil little voice,
the only reason is because they would have killed her given half the chance. It's what they do.
Shut up, Garrett said, and jumped at the sound of his own voice.
It's true,
said the little voice. Garrett shook his head to clear it and concentrated on walking down the particularly long flight of stairs that led from the Master Keeper's quarters to the dormitories where the acolytes and novices slept.
This is stupid,
he thought.
It's over, and there's nothing I can do about it.
With that reassuring thought, he carefully opened the door to the room he shared with Aloysius and 2 other boys. He took extra care to be silent as he changed into his nightshirt and climbed the short ladder to his bunk. But Aloysius was a light sleeper.
"Where the hell have you been, you little taffer?"
Aloysius whispered, craning his neck to look up at Garrett from his own bottom bunk. Garrett stared blankly at his friend and almost spilled the whole story. Far off, he could hear the clock tower chime the hour. It was very late, or very early, depending on how you looked at it. Nowhere, Garrett answered finally, and climbed into bed. Aloysius sighed exasperatedly, but he didn't ask again. Some floors below them, a woman named Katika examined the glyph text she was reading and frowned.